We all watched Sesame Street as a kid. I never thought anything of it at the time. Sure, I loved Elmo. We all did. But that was a long time ago, and honestly now, I can't even remember any of the characters that well. Or at least I couldn't, until I had my daughter. From a young age, she was drawn to Elmo. It was her first word, even. My husband and I were so shocked, but it was adorable at the time. Anytime she saw an Elmo at the store or on the TV, she would point at him and proclaim his name for all to hear. Around age 2, it had become a full-blown obsession, and she would throw a huge tantrum when I told her Sesame Street would be over for the day. It seemed like no Elmo was enough Elmo for her. One day, we were searching through my childhood things, and I found an Elmo plushie I had as a child. He was worn. The blacks of his eyes had faded in places. His arms were stretched and his nose had become misshapen. Even his fur had been rubbed down to nearly nothing. He almost looked smooth. My daughter immediately recognized him, of course, and called out.
Elmo?
That night, she refused to sleep with her typical white teddy bear and kept fussing and crying until we let her sleep with my old Elmo toy. What could be the harm in it, I thought. He was old and worn, but he wasn't dirty and he didn't have any possible choking hazards. We handed off the toy to her, and soon she was fast asleep. I'm a light sleeper, so even the smallest and faintest noise wakes me up at night, while my husband could sleep through a stampede. The silence was very welcomed, is what I'm trying to say. Now, this next part is where things become difficult to believe, but I swear on my life that everything I tell you now is true. At some point in the night, I awoke to the sound of a soft yet familiar song. It was the Elmo's World theme song, and yet, at the same time, it wasn't. I called out to my husband. He must have let the TV on in the living room, but there was no reply. He was still asleep next to me. I got out of bed, and as I approached the living room, I quickly realized the song was coming from my daughter's room. She didn't have a TV in her room. I cautiously approached her bedroom door, believing I must have been imagining things. But when I opened the door, I couldn't believe what I saw. My daughter was fast asleep, and sitting next to her, stroking her hair, was my old Elmo toy. I was petrified from pure shock. I went to pinch myself. This must have been a bad dream, and I needed to wake up. Before I could move my body, Elmo spoke to me.
Yes, Elmo promises it's safe. Elmo just wants to play like old times. Please, Elmo misses you. Elmo loves you. Elmo knows he's forever alone. It's okay. Elmo forgives you.
I turned around and slammed the door, and ran back to my room to wake up my husband. I shook him until he awoke in a panic. I was so scared I couldn't even tell him what was going on. I led him to my daughter's room. He thought she was fatally hurt or already dead. Once he opened the door, though, he began to cry. He kept asking me why I woke him up, and now I woke the baby up. I didn't have an answer, as all I could do was watch Elmo lying there lifeless. It must have been a nightmare after all. The next morning, I tried to take my old Elmo toy away from my daughter, but she began to scream. My husband became upset with me for being cruel to her. She loved Elmo and wanted him. It was her toy now. I told him it made me uncomfortable, that I got a bad feeling from it. My husband became more upset with me and told me to stop being ridiculous. I gave my daughter back the old Elmo toy. He was right. She loved Elmo, and I was being ridiculous, and yet I couldn't kick the feeling, the anxiety of that old toy. No matter where I sat in the room, it looked as if Elmo was always staring at me. He was always facing me. It was like he was waiting an answer from me. By night, I set up a video monitor in my daughter's room. I told my husband it just made me feel better to be able to see her, and he didn't argue it with me. And again at night, I heard the song. This time, it sounded as if it was reaching out to me, calling me, almost by name. It knew me. I glanced at the baby monitor. My daughter was still asleep. But Elmo wasn't there despite joining her in her crib again tonight. I quickly went to wake up my husband, and when I went to reach for him, all I felt was tattered fur. It was my old Elmo toy, laying between my husband and I. I pulled back my hand as the toy reached out for me and spoke once again.
Did you forget about Elmo? It's okay. Elmo promises. Elmo didn't forget about you.
I asked what it wanted from me as tears began to stream down my face.
Mo just wants to play.
It explained. Instinctually, I kicked my husband's leg as hard as I could in hopes of waking him up. However, the force was greater than I anticipated, and my kick sent Elmo and my husband and our covers to the floor. I jumped out of bed to flip on the light and help my husband up. Of course, he was really upset with me. But I knew once I explained what was happening, he would understand. I went through the covers to find Elmo, to prove to him that I wasn't crazy. I shook the covers furiously, but nothing was there. My husband curled back into bed after glancing at our daughter's baby monitor. Elmo was back in her crib with her. I apologized, but he told me he wanted to speak to a specialist about the delusions I was having, and I agreed. I went and saw a psychiatrist the following day. He believed I was suffering from a form of schizophrenia and prescribed me some antipsychotics to take. He said they wouldn't take effect right away, but soon everything would return to normal again. My delusions weren't real, and they couldn't hurt me or my family. That's what he told me anyway. That night, the song was louder than usual, but I chose not to even open my eyes. I wouldn't be entertaining my mental illness any longer, that's what I kept telling myself. And then I felt worn fur stroke my back.
What do you want to play with Elmo anymore? Why don't you love Elmo anymore?
I heard it speak, but I refused to reply.
Elmo just wants your love. Elmo just...
I couldn't take it anymore, so I pushed my back violently to toss whatever was touching me away. The next morning, my daughter woke up screaming. My husband and I ran to her room. She was crying out for Elmo, but we couldn't find the toy anywhere. My husband asked me what I had done with it. I told him I didn't touch it, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Our daughter was inconsolable, and her screeching made my head pound. It was the kind of cry that couldn't be ignored. The pain was so intense, you could feel it yourself. Every passing hour, my husband became more frustrated. He began throwing pillows and objects in search of the Elmo toy. I was holding my beloved child. I bounced her on my knee and attempted to give her something to eat or drink, but nothing worked. I even turned on Sesame Street, Elmo's World, but it wasn't enough. She wanted Elmo. She wanted that Elmo. She cried the entire day. Her voice became hoarse from the screaming. Worried, my husband and I took her to the hospital. They had to sedate her just to run tests on her. But they couldn't find anything wrong. They gave us some medication to keep her calm, and we eventually took her back home with us. After we laid her down for bed, my husband refused to speak to me. He still believed I had gotten rid of the old Elmo toy. This time there was no song at night. I still don't know what compelled me to get out of bed and walk into the hallway. I saw his shadowy figure standing outside her door. The whites of his eyes pierced through the darkness of the night. They were looking at me. They are always looking at me.
Figure it out now. Elmo knows what you love.
My heart sank when he said that. I told him he wasn't real, but he continued to speak.
Elmo forgives you. Elmo loves you. Elmo won't be forgotten again.
My heart began to pound. I begged him not to touch my daughter, but he disappeared into the night with a chuckle. back to my bedroom to check the baby monitor, but the batteries were dead. In a panic, I raced back to my daughter's room, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked. My daughter's room didn't have a lock. I began to scream for help from my husband, but he didn't answer. Nobody could hear me. Nobody was coming. I couldn't do nothing. I wouldn't be a victim. I ran back to my bedroom to wake up my husband. He was angry and he accused me of not taking my medication. I swore to him I was. This was real. This wasn't a delusion. I finally got him to agree to come to my daughter's room. I froze in place when I noticed her bedroom door was open from the hallway. My husband went in and then began to scream. A scream like I had never heard before. A scream you would think no man could make. Before I could process what was happening, his hands were on my shoulders and he was shaking me violently. He kept asking me where I put her. Put who? What? Our daughter. He was talking about our daughter. She was gone. I told him that it must have been Elmo. Who else could it have been? He didn't like that. He slapped me across the face in rage at even the mention of Elmo. He called me disgusting and threw me to the floor. He said it wasn't the time for jokes and it wasn't funny. It wasn't a joke. And he kept asking me what I had done to her. I didn't do anything to her. I told him that. And he didn't believe me. He never believes me. Nobody listens. And then he went and he called 911. And he told them that he believed his mentally ill wife had killed his child and hidden the body. I begged him. I told him I would never. Soon the police arrived and handcuffed me. They questioned me for seemingly days without giving me any water or food. And they wouldn't believe me when I told them the truth. When I told them who had taken my daughter. The search for my daughter began. But no one found her. And as weeks passed, they gave up hope. Eventually they transferred me to a ward for the criminally insane. They told me I killed my daughter, and I wouldn't be allowed out until I admitted to it, and told them where her body was so that my husband could have a proper burial. But I didn't kill her, and I refused to admit to something I didn't do. And as the years went by, my husband never visited me, or called. In fact, no one did, except one.